Hello, everybody. There's something that doing programs like this always makes you do, a combination of reminiscing and research. I was thinking about the first aviation publication that I ever read. It was back in 1968. That's your first clue of how old I am. Any guesses what that might have been? Yep, Flying Magazine. Funny thing is, it had already been on the newsstands for 41 years, starting in 1927. Anyhow, I had what I would call a trifecta of a dilemma with my fascination with flying that included me listening to pilots flying overhead with a little aviation radio I got from Radio Shack. That's the second clue about how old I am. And I also learned about line of sight at that tender age. It wasn't until I went out to the airport that I realized why I wasn't able to hear the control tower. I was only able to hear the pilots. So all you pilots, you guys get that. And then I was interested in flying for the military, but wearing these, well, that took care of that idea. And then there's broadcasting. It's a whole nother story, but the short and sweet of it is that it became my career of choice until about 14 years ago when I discovered that I could work in aviation in a very unique way. So being in the company of like-minded professionals who have some great things to share with us today really has me on cloud nine, flight level 450, or whatever works for you. The funny thing about aviation journalism is that as prevalent as it is, the big question that comes to the forefront is how do you get into aviation journalism? That along with the various outlets, publications, digital platforms to look for. And that's what hopefully Tom and Elan and Matt today will answer, along with giving their perspective and insight on the industry. Now, granted, I am biased, but aviation journalism can give you the best of all worlds. You spend your life meeting the most amazing and awe-inspiring people. You'll experience opportunities not available to most, and you'll see new technology up close and personal before the masses get a peek. And then there's the digital platform universe that takes it to a whole nother level exponentially. Hi, everybody, I'm Vince Mickens, and welcome to All Things Aviation. So let me first introduce our panel of veteran aviation guests. We'll start with Tom Haines. Tom and I go back 14 years, starting with AOPA that I joined back then. And Tom is currently the editor-in-chief of AOPA Pilot. He has what I call a paragraph of a title. He is the senior vice president of media, communications, and outreach for AOPA. Since learning to fly in his late teens, Tom has logged more than 4,000 hours in almost as many aircraft. No, I'm just kidding, but in a lot of different aircraft. He's had the pleasure of flying every kind of aircraft you can imagine all over the world. He currently owns and flies an A36 Bonanza. Yes. Great airplane.
Yep.
Tom, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, thanks, Vince. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this group.
Thank you. And then we have Elan Head. Elan is the editorial director of MHM Publishing up in Canada. So most people don't know the name of the publishing company, but they know Vertical Magazine and Vertical Valor and Skies and Insight magazines. And then there's eVTOL.com, which is a really cool website, by the way, Elan. She is a FAA Gold Seal flight instructor. That's impressive just by itself, with helicopter and instrument helicopter ratings, and has held a commercial helicopter license in Canada, Australia, as well as here in the United States. Elan, it's a pleasure meeting you and glad you could be with us today.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here as well. Looking forward to it.
And then last but not least, Matt Thurber. So Matt has been in the industry a long time as well. Matt is currently the editor-in-chief of Aviation International News. I enjoy reading that publication monthly, and Business Jet Traveler. Matt has been flying since 1975. Matt, we're in that same starting to fly age range, you and I and Tom. and has been writing about aviation since 1978. Okay, Matt, you got a couple years on me. And on top of everything else, Matt has his airframe and power plant license, or better known as A&P certification. I think that's pretty cool. And we are really happy to have you with us today, Matt.
Thank you, Vince. I really appreciate the opportunity to share what we know with everybody.
Thank you. So now, two of our aspiring young aviation professionals that we have on the panel today, and then we have a lot viewing us. We'll start with Dakota Foster. Dakota is the 2017 graduate of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach with a bachelor's in Aeronautical Science. She is currently a first officer for Republic Airlines and is the recipient of the Bob Hoover Presidential and Citation Jet Pilots Scholarship. Dakota, it's great to have you. There's a lot more to tell about you, but I just wanted to say hello and welcome you aboard.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited for the opportunity to be here today with you guys. Thank you.
You can tell I think I'm up in the cockpit or something. I'm talking about welcome aboard, like we're on a flight. Anyhow, and then we have Michael Wilds. Michael is the 2016 graduate, also from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, Daytona Beach, and is currently working on as a flight instructor, and he is a check airman for their flight department. Michael is currently pursuing his master's in logistics and supply chain management. That's an interesting major or pursuit. So we'll have to talk about that a little bit more. Michael and I go back with regard to Dream Soar and Shasta, who flew around the world at a very young age, and he was involved with that. Michael, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Vince. It's a pleasure to be here.
So it's great to have everybody here today. And I'd like to kind of start things off with Michael or Dakota. Tell us a little bit more about your background. We'll start with you, Dakota, and a little bit more in depth, and also what your perspective is and what you're looking at as far as aviation today, as we start talking about aviation journalism as one of the areas in aviation that people could pursue.
Absolutely. All right. So hello, everyone. Kind of as Vince already introduced me, I'm Dakota. I'm a first officer with Republic Airways. I'm born and raised in the Buckeye State, so good old Ohio, OH. So I was born and raised here, and I actually have no family with prior aviation experience. I didn't know any pilots. I just happened to live by our local airport, which is where I happened to find kind of like that spark of interest with aviation. So after quite a bit of Googling for schools and for scholarships, I found my way down to Embry-Riddle in Daytona Beach. I did, it was 4 years from start to finish. I did a 6-month internship as well in between there. I obtained all my licenses at Embry-Riddle, everything from private pilot with my first solo all the way through my commercial multi-engine ratings there. And then I also completed my CFI, which is my flight instructor license, as well as my instrument instructor license. So I did both of those down there in Florida as well. So after graduating, I was a flight instructor about 10 minutes south of where I graduated at a flight school called Epic Flight Academy over in New Smyrna Beach. I was there for just over 1 year as a flight instructor. I started out teaching instrument. Gotta love doing holds all day long, just going and basically lap patterns for the whole entire day. So that's what I started out with. And as I kind of built my confidence and my experience as an instructor, then I moved on to become a multi-engine flight instructor, as well as a progress check pilot. So I was actually doing the mock check rides with my students before they would go up with the FAA examiner and do them as well. So I was there, like I said, just over a year, got my 1,000 hours, and very quickly hopped over into the airline side of things, Part 121. So I've been with Republic Airways now for, it'll be 2 years next month. So I fly the Embraer 170, 175. It's a 76 seat passenger jet, considered a regional aircraft. And like I said, I've been there 2 years, based out of Columbus, Ohio, which is about 2 hours from where I'm from. But we do serve for United and American and Delta as well. So I actually fly for all 3 carriers and get a good experience with each of the different airlines by working for Republic. So, but yeah, I'm really excited to be here today, excited to learn about the journalism side of things as well. When you do go over to the airline world, switching from the general aviation side, you definitely kind of lose touch with everything that's going on with general aviation, but I'm excited to see how all of us work together today.
Thanks. You know, Matt, we were talking earlier about how challenging it is to get people aware of, or to get people into aviation journalism. Why don't you share some of the perspective we talked about earlier about that?
Sure. Thanks, Vince. Aviation journalism is a really small niche segment of the aviation industry, but I like to start out by, anytime I meet somebody who's interested in aviation, the first thing I say to them is, look, you've got to read anything and everything you can get your hands on about the subject if you're really interested in it. And there's no better way to do that than all the different publications that are available now. Online, most of it is free. You can just spend days and days reading everything you can get your hands on, watching videos, listening to podcasts. And if you do that, you'll learn a lot about aviation, and you'll know a lot more than most of your peers will, because you're spending the time learning about it.
Matt, what was your path for you getting started in aviation journalism?
I got started. I always liked to write in school. I didn't study journalism formally, but I was sitting at the airport on a foggy day one day, twiddling my thumbs, and decided to write a story based on my experience as a mechanic on how aircraft owners can do a lot of their own maintenance. I thought it was a subject that a lot of owners didn't know about, and it turned out to be true, because the first magazine I sent it to bought a one-year series of articles on the subject. So that's what got me started.
Wow.
I had written some other stories and sent them before, and got rejected. So this was the first time I saw some success.
Wow, that's really great. So you wrote an article, and that was the very first step towards all the things you've done since.
Exactly. And I think a key for aspiring writers to know is that I didn't write it with the thought of, here's something that I think I can sell to a magazine. I wrote it with the thought of, here's something that the reader really needs to know about. And that's the whole point of journalism, is to serve the reader. If you give the readers information they need, there will be an outlet for that material.
Yeah, yeah. Tom, you have had a unique career in terms of your rise into where you are now as an aviation journalist. How about telling us a little bit about your background?
Sure, thanks, Vince. Yeah, I never thought I'd end up here. I did learn to fly in high school, and as Dakota said, I didn't really have anybody else in my family who was into aviation, and just sort of stumbled upon it. But then went to college as a general science major, and through some circumstances just ended up in a journalism department, and mostly because I discovered that I liked writing all those English papers that were part of the gen ed courses. And I had a lot of encouragement in high school from a writing teacher, an English teacher, who thought that my writing was pretty good, and it really encouraged me. So I kind of ended up in the journalism program, and then did traditional journalism in radio and newspapers right out of college. But through some of unusual circumstance, I ended up spotting an ad for an aviation magazine that was looking for an associate editor called Professional Pilot Magazine, and ended up there for a couple of years, and then ultimately came to AOPA shortly thereafter as an associate editor, and kind of quickly worked up through this organization, and have been editor-in-chief now for 26 years, I guess it's been, and been at AOPA for 30 couple. But anyhow,
3 decades, give or take.
Yeah, right, at that point. But it's been great. I've had the opportunity to, as you alluded to in the introduction, fly general aviation airplanes all over the world and fly a great variety of airplanes. And I think that's the one thing to keep in mind for anybody who's passionate about aviation, passionate about flying, is that if you can combine that with some knowledge and skills about writing and communicating, you can really find a really rewarding career in aviation journalism. It is small. There aren't a huge number of opportunities, particularly these days, as Matt said, but there are opportunities out there. And it's important to what Matt said also, when it comes to thinking about ideas and what it is that you might write about, is keep in mind that the first priority needs to be it's a subject that matters to people. Either it inspires them to go out and fly and learn new things about aviation, or it teaches them to be a better pilot, or provides them information about how to maintain their airplane, or those kind of things. And if it's that kind of information, there's always a market for that out there in some aviation media channel. If it's well written, you'll find a place for it in some way, shape, or form. And it's also really a lot of versatility from a time standpoint. Airline pilots like Dakota, they do have their schedules allow for them to have blocks of time available to them, and so you can use that time to maybe go out and do some stories that you might find an outlet for in the aviation media space, while also doing your airline job. So lots of places you can put your skills to work.
Yeah. So I wanted to go to Elan because she comes from the helicopter world, and give her a chance to tell us a little bit about her. And then I want to touch on an aspect of journalism that all three of you have been dealing with in recent years in particular, and that's the digital side. But first, let's hear a little bit about you, Elan, and your background.
Sure. So helicopters are like a niche within the niche of aviation.
Exactly.
But I enjoy them. So I actually started out as a journalist first. So I was a newspaper reporter and a freelance writer, and got into travel writing. And I think it was back in 2004, I did this amazing travel writing assignment to British Columbia, where I got to go for my first helicopter ride, which was to take me out to go fly fishing for the day. So that was a pretty cool assignment. It was my first time in a helicopter, the most amazing thing I'd ever done. Got back, started talking to the pilot, asking him all kinds of questions. How does this work? How long does it take to get your license? He said, 3 to 4 months, which blew my mind because I figured it was a massive career commitment. Went home. I was living in Phoenix at the time, and actually pretty close to a great flight school, Quantum Helicopters. Signed up for lessons, and then basically ended up doing the full professional pilot program with Quantum. Worked there as a flight instructor for a while. I got my 1,000 hours of Quantum, and then did some other jobs. Then I had an opportunity to move down to Australia to edit a helicopter magazine down there. And that's kind of how I jumped into aviation journalism full time. Was working for that magazine in Australia. After a year in Australia, I moved up to Canada to join Vertical magazine. And I've been with Vertical ever since, although I've been working remotely for the past 10 years or so. And I'm currently in Belize. So let's hope that my Wi-Fi connection holds up for the duration of this session.
Well, if it doesn't, we'll give you a chance to check back in with us. But nice place to have a Wi-Fi issue, if I may say.
There are definitely worse places.
So I'll start with you, Elan, because you have the eVTOL, and then AIN, or Aviation International News, has AIN Online, and of course, Tom, you guys have ePilot. All of you are in a digital space. We know that the younger generation is in a digital space. I'm sure Dakota and Michael can speak to that. What is your perspective on that as it relates to opportunities in the industry? Has it opened it up a lot because it's a different type of platform, et cetera?
Well, Well, I'll say from our perspective, it's been a really interesting evolution. So, Vertical started out as this beautiful, huge, glossy print magazine. And, that's kind of like where our love is, huge focus on photography and air-to-air shoots and really making this beautiful printed product. And, since I've been with the company about a decade now, we've really seen that increasing emphasis on online and the digital environment and social media. So I head up all of our social media efforts as well. So we've seen that grow considerably and a real difference in how people are, consuming news. Certainly for me, especially being down here in Belize, I consume all of my media online now and through social media. And so it's been interesting for us. We have actually suspended print publication just due to the COVID crisis. So now, we have a great emphasis online. But we've tried to look at it more as an expansion. So, instead of just abandoning kind of our traditional magazine format, we've expanded into breaking news coverage and social media and so forth. So it's definitely created some opportunities. So, we have more need for those types of online stories where you don't necessarily have to be an incredibly talented air-to-air photographer to, do a feature story for us. But it's also increased competition as well. And, thinking back to when I was first working as a freelance writer, I could make a really decent living at it because the rates were, pretty good in those days. And, even over the past 2 decades, that's been eroded to the point where, scratching out a living as a freelancer is much more difficult than it used to be. So circling back to, a point Tom made, a lot of our writers, are full-time professional pilots or mechanics, or they have another job. And writing is kind of an opportunity for them to, pursue their passion kind of as a side project while also, focusing on maybe what they went into aviation for originally.
So you're both saying that if you have writing talent, if you're a natural writer and you happen to be a pilot or working in aviation as a professional pilot or otherwise, that might present itself opportunities for you to freelance or and contribute in that way.
Yeah, I'd say so. And it's not just writing these days, because you can talk about digital. So now there's lots of other pathways. Maybe you're really good with video, good editor, maybe you're good on camera, and you've got an in-depth knowledge. There are lots of opportunities around video. Podcast is another one. It's really about communication, I think, more than just writing. In the magazine days, it really was about writing or maybe photography. But now it's much broader than that. Podcasts, blogs, and lots of other ways to communicate in addition to writing are available out there. And we know people mechanics who have great blog series or great podcast series and have really put their skills to work in a mass communication kind of way through, say, podcasts. Like we just watched one.
That gives me an opportunity to introduce Michael. Michael has done exactly that to some degree with regard to his foray into media after getting a degree in aviation, aeronautical science at Embry-Riddle, and currently flight instructing there. Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and your transition towards media?
Right. So thanks for having me, Vince. So I grew up in Jamaica, and then I've always wanted to be a pilot. Like most other pilots who this is the sort of thing you want to do when you're born. But I've always wanted to go to Embry-Riddle. So in 2011, I went to Embry-Riddle as a student, as a flight student. But growing up, I always had an interest in media, in video and print. And, I dabbled in some form of media in different ways. I was actually the managing editor for the Aviation, which is Embry-Riddle's school's newspaper, while I was there. And throughout my tenure at school, I also interned at Southwest Airlines in jobs that were actually writing jobs. So one was a flight ops intern, but it was for technical writing. And then the second internship was for media development. I also developed like training courses for Embry-Riddle's students, and even now as a flight instructor, develop in-course training for our flight instructors. So for me, even though I don't consider myself a journalist, media has always given me an opportunity to express myself. It gave me an opportunity with the Dreams for Flight, where when Chastaways was preparing to go around the world, I saw an opportunity for us to communicate her message with her followers and all the people who are interested in the Dream Soar mission. So I provided support there through newsletters and videos. And as Tom said, it wasn't just print anymore, because I think there's an interesting statistics out there that, 80% of the internet these days is video. So you almost have to have that group of skills to communicate. And for me, it's been, it has given me like an awesome opportunity to meet new people and to go to different events and to just learn about the industry.
I believe that as far as the video, because my three daughters, that's all they do. Just watch videos all the time. So that statistic's probably pretty accurate. It might even be low. No, just kidding. So I wanted to kind of put this out there for a minute, because as I was listening to you and listening to what Tom and everybody had to say about the digital universe, I think it is something that that expands everything just the way Tom just explained. So I'm going to shift to this for a second and start with you, Tom. Tom, what's one of the very unique experiences you've had in all of the experience you've had as a longtime aviation journalist? Can you tell us a story about something that was just something you totally never thought you'd be doing?
Yeah, there are lots of those. We could talk for a long time. I mean, one particular trip that comes to mind, an opportunity that came along, was to do a flying safari in Southern Africa. So here's an opportunity to use a general aviation airplane to fly in Botswana, South Africa, and Zambia, and to go and visit a bunch of camps and for photo safari. And in the course of about 8 days, we were in 3 countries and I don't know, 5 camps, I think it was.
What kind of aircraft?
Oh, Cessna 182, so really basic,
Nice.
great little airplane. And there were 2 of us that went, or 2 couples and 2 different airplanes. And that was been done lots of things, but just seeing the animals in that environment and the ability to move around and take advantage of what a general aviation airplane can do. That was certainly one of the more memorable stories that I had the opportunity to do, and a way to use a general aviation airplane that was really meaningful.
Yeah. Matt, how about you? I'm sure you have at least one good story you could tell about your experiences.
So one of the cool flights I got to do was a ferry delivery flight of a TBM 910 single engine turboprop from the factory in France all the way to California.
Nice.
And what I thought made it unique was that this was a real delivery trip. They didn't set it up for me or anything. They just called me up and said, "Hey, we've got a right seat available. If you want to go, show up here and let's do it." And what I learned on this was, when you're ferrying airplanes on a regular basis, you have to have a go mentality. You can't be stopping for minor discrepancies, or if the weather's not that great, you might still have to go. And all the limitations you have with range, with weather conditions. I'm not saying that you're pushing safety margins, but you have to push nonetheless. And it was a great trip. I wrote about it, and I also shot a lot of video during the trip, and we put together a video on that. So that was that was really fun. But I have to also say that the most intense experience I ever had was the nearly month-long Gulfstream G550 jet type rating that I did at Flight Safety. That was one of the hardest training exercises I've ever done, and I came out of that feeling like it was a incredible workout, but it was also extremely rewarding.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'll concur, Matt. I've done 2 type ratings as well, and both of them were very challenging, and it was a real workout. So I'd agree.
Elan, you have flown in Canada and Australia, and of course here in the States. Any great story to share of an experience that really stood out to you?
You know, I can't choose just one because I've had so many incredible experiences through aviation journalism. But I will say we hired a new editor for eVTOL.com recently, who we'll be announcing shortly. And I was telling him some of the things that I've done. So, you know, things from, you know, embedding in Afghanistan or with peacekeeping operations in Mali, going down to Haiti after the earthquake, you know, flying into the jungles of Papua New Guinea, you know, visiting Everest Space Camp in Nepal. So many different things. And
Wow. What kind of aircraft did you fly in those situations?
Oh, a variety. So, I mean, you know, Chinooks and Blackhawks in Afghanistan, I was obviously riding in the back to, you know, A-Stars in Nepal. Speaking of animals, got to fly with the unit that patrols Kruger National Park in South Africa. That was an incredible experience. But as I was explaining to our new editor, aviation is not just, you know, wonderful and fascinating in itself. It plays a part in so many of the big stories in the world. You know, whatever is happening in the world that's, you know, big and significant that you might be interested in as a citizen, there's usually an aviation angle to it. And so for me, like one of the coolest things about my job is that, you know, aviation and helicopters in particular have provided an entry point into all of these interesting stories around the world and, you know, given me the chance to, you know, see what's happening on the ground firsthand and get a different perspective than, you know, maybe a mainstream reporter would.
Yeah. So listen, I just wanted to hear a couple of the stories. I knew you guys had some interesting flying experiences to share. But getting back with Dakota and Michael, Michael, do you guys have questions specific to getting into an aviation journalism career?
I had a question for Elan. Just as you mentioned, aviation being a good segue into or having a place in everything that we do. You know, one of the major stories that happened this year was the helicopter crash with Kobe Bryant, and I think for the general public, that was a entry point for them to start asking questions about helicopters because throughout the story, a lot came out, you know, about the visibility and why was the helicopter pilot flying so low. And I saw that there was an interest there for people. How was that story for you? How did you handle that? Where did you see any opportunities for you to, you know, provide clarification for people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the Kobe crash is something I covered extensively because I was actually in Camarillo the day it happened. So, you know, the
Wow.
point for the helicopter. I was there to do some gyroplane training, actually, which was, you know, kind of a fun story that I got to do. Woke up that morning, I was kind of sick anyways, and, you know, the airport was socked in with fog, and so it was pretty obvious I wasn't going to be flying that day. And then, of course, a couple hours later, I heard about the crash. I've written about this story extensively, and one point I made is that, you know, crashes like Kobe Bryant's aren't anything new. They bring up safety issues that certainly I've been covering for my entire career of writing about helicopters, which is, you know, kind of discouraging that these accidents are happening and for the same reasons. One thing that was, you know, interesting for me about this crash, it was an opportunity for me to, you know, kind of explain to a larger audience what some of these safety concerns are. And I think that the crash might provide an opportunity to actually see some positive changes come out of that. One thing that's frustrating for me about the helicopter industry is it is very obscure. You know, again, it's a niche within a niche. And so a lot of these crashes that I've written about previously haven't gotten a lot of attention, certainly not in the way that, say, like the 737 MAX crashes had. When you have that public attention, you get a lot of you know, political pressure on the industry, pressure on the government to affect some positive changes. I'm hoping that we'll see that happen with the Kobe Bryant crash because, for a lot of people, it is the first time that they've really kind of thought seriously about what these issues in the helicopter industry are. So, again, aviation journalism, one great thing about it is that you're able to really gain an in-depth expertise on a subject that mainstream reporters, don't have the time to cultivate. And so you're able to explain these big issues, hopefully in a way that, kind of gets to the heart of what the actual issues involved are. And of course, the best thing that journalism can accomplish is to affect positive change. And I think that's something we all hope would come out of our work eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, you guys have a helicopter section, and Tom, you guys have done things on helicopters. Were either of you involved with or affected by what happened with that particular high visibility incident?
Oh yeah, we were probably all at the time in California for the Heli Expo show that that was starting that week, and it was just a shocking event. But we had to kick into gear to cover it. One interesting aspect of the accident is that nowadays, with so many electronic tracking systems like ADS-B on the most aircraft, information about the flight path was almost instantly available, and it kind of set off a lot of uninformed speculation in the general media that
It sure did.
hopefully the aviation journalists were able to shed a little bit more light on.
Right. Yeah, we had a lot of media calls at AOPA. We have a whole media relations department that tries to, talk about general aviation in a positive way and provide general media reporters with good, solid information about general aviation and safety stats and background about airplanes and aircraft and that sort of thing. So we had a lot of media calls after the Kobe crash as well, and tried to help them understand the capabilities of helicopters, the limitations of helicopters, the weather, the technology that the helicopter may or may not have had in the form of TAWS terrain warning system and EGPWS and other systems like that. So yeah, we were heavily involved in of course, trying not to speculate either, because that's something that everybody wants to do and nobody should do until we've got a lot more information than we have in the first few days after an accident.
Yeah, absolutely. Shifting gears a little bit, Dakota, you're well on your way in the airline industry, but we are talking about aviation journalism today. Did you have any questions for the panel?
Yeah, actually, and I guess any of you guys can answer this for me. So when I'm up there, what I do is I read these puppies. I get them in the mail once a month.
Thank you. We
So
appreciate it.
yeah, so I still keep in touch with the GA side of things via my magazines. Of course, I still have the online and the digital social media type ways of getting a hold of my information. But with COVID, with the COVID crisis, my understanding of what you guys do is you're actually out there on the line meeting with pilots, mechanics, dispatchers, you name it, air traffic control. You're thinking of stories to talk to for your audiences, that sort of a thing. So with the COVID crisis, what opportunities or what challenges have you guys been personally facing as far as journalism goes?
I'll take that.
Go ahead,
Matt.
Tom.
Okay, fine. I mean, for us, I think one of the challenges has been, well, there were two. One was just simply the technology to continue to produce content when working from home, because we all got sent home on March 17th and said, don't come back unless it's absolutely critical that you come back to the office for something, but otherwise we're expected to work from home. I'm happy to say we never missed a deadline for any of our email newsletters or any of our online products or video or magazines. And so we were able to pull that off. But the second challenge was getting content, because we have a big travel budget. We have people traveling all over the place, getting content, and suddenly we were really restricted on travel. It just wasn't safe. You couldn't go a lot of places. People didn't want to meet with you. Manufacturers that typically are really happy to have you show up and to show you their airplane suddenly were not at all interested in having you come to their facilities. And so it became a challenge for us to get content. We fortunately had a big spike. We had a lot of content already kind of in the pipeline that we could continue to use. But we had to get pretty creative on doing a lot of calls like this with subject matter experts in the field, gathering video remotely and that sort of thing. So it's presented some challenges, but I think we've met them pretty well. And but we're all, I think, anxious to get back out and go to some of the aviation events that normally we'd all see each other at, and go back in kind of a little more normal times, though.
I have a question, Tom. So, aviation is very cyclical. We have all these crises that do tend to come around. We had 9/11, at least in my time, 9/11 and the recession, and maybe before in the 90s, you had other things. Is this the hardest crisis or the most challenging crisis that has come up? And, to sort of piggyback off what Dakota said, is this the most challenging thing to cover or to operate in?
I would say so. I mean, 9/11 was obviously very impactful, but it was relatively short-lived from an aviation standpoint. We still have the ripple effects of it from some airspace constraints and that sort of thing, but AOPA was very involved in getting aviation and general aviation in particular back in the air relatively quickly after 9/11. And it was a while before things began to return to normal because we still had a lot of restrictions from an airspace standpoint, but things came back up pretty quickly. And yeah, we've been all of us have been through numerous economic cycles over the years. And so we've seen a number of airplane manufacturing kind of ebb and flow and that sort of thing. But this one it's because it's so prolonged. We've been at months and months now of impact. I guess the good news though is while we've been challenged to gather content, general aviation has actually done quite well, except for the very highest end of the big jet manufacturers, because international travel is down so much. So if you manufacture Gulfstreams and Falcons and that sort of thing, those have softened. The used market has softened there, and certainly anybody who supports international transportation from the FBO side and maintenance and all that sort of thing has probably felt the impact. But lighter general aviation activity has actually been running, particularly for the last 6 weeks or so, about 20% over 2019 numbers during these same periods. So general aviation activity is actually quite high. And so that's been really beneficial. Used aircraft prices have remained very strong. In fact, they're up. Light turbine airplane prices are up. So people are not selling airplanes. We saw that a lot after the 2008, 2009 economic downturn. We saw a whole lot of companies selling off their turbine airplanes, and the turbine market got very soft. And we've seen very little of that with this crisis.
So
Matt,
go ahead.
I was going to say, Matt, you've obviously been through a bunch of these cycles as well, and you may have similar observations or not.
Yes, Michael, you're right. It's kind of endemic to aviation to have a lot of ups and downs, and this is, I'd say, probably the worst one that I've seen, except for maybe the huge drop in manufacturing in the early 1980s due to high levels of inflation. But the way it's affected aviation journalism is there's still a story for us to tell. There's no shortage of subjects for us to write about and ways we can serve our readers and viewers. But it has had a fairly significant effect on those who support our industry, and that's the advertisers. So we've had to be very careful with our budgets, and unfortunately that's had a fairly significant effect on what we're able to spend for freelance work. We're doing our best to try to change that, but it's just a fact of life.
Yeah. Before we start to run out of time, Tom, Matt, Elan, I wanted to let our viewers and our guest panelists know a little bit more about what you guys look for. You've touched on it, all of you've touched on a little bit during this program, but what do you look for in terms of someone that is interested in applying to become an aviation journalist in some form or fashion? Could you each kind of give a perspective on that?
Sure, I'll start. So, again, we have, very limited full-time positions, I would say, even though we just hired someone. For those full-time roles, I think passion. Passion for aviation, passion for journalism. If you've got passion for both, that's even better. But real kind of desire to tell those stories that are important to the industry and to make an impact. I think that's really key. In terms of freelancing, as was mentioned before, stories that are meaningful, to the audience. If you are telling a story that people want to read, then it doesn't matter if you aren't maybe the best or most polished writer, because writing takes practice like anything, and that's what editors are for, to help you out. But
That's a good point.
you understand the audience and you understand what they need to hear, then that, again, there's always going to be a place to publish those stories. From my perspective, I would say it's easier to train someone on the writing part of it than it is the technical knowledge and understanding. Anyone who combines both, they're wonderful. I'll give them lots of work. But certainly from our perspective, especially in something so specialized as helicopters, if you have that kind of niche industry knowledge, that's really valuable to us, and we can kind of help you out with the writing part of it if necessary.
Yeah, I'd concur on the passion part. That's really critical. You have to really be enthused and excited and inspired by aviation, and hopefully come forward with story ideas and concepts that inspire others and keep readers, viewers, listeners, as we have today, engaged with your content and make people care about a particular subject that you're writing about. And that really, I think, all gets back to passion. If you're passionate about it, that'll come through one way or the other. And Elan is right. We can help you from an editing standpoint. We can help make a pretty good story really good with the right editing.
That's great advice from Elan and Tom. The way I look at it is absolutely have to be passionate about the subject and really be willing to learn about the subject. And from a reader's perspective, what you're trying to do is help the reader understand something. So you have to be, as a writer, full of questions, because if you're not full of questions, then you're not going to find out the information that really means a lot to the reader. Like if you're watching television news, for example, and you keep saying, why didn't you ask this? Why didn't you ask that? That's a good sign that you're on the right track. Or if you're reading an article and you're like, well, why didn't they give the price of that jet in the article? That's good information that the readers can use. And from the standpoint of reaching out to try and find opportunities in aviation journalism, I don't just speak for myself. I'm sure us editors welcome hearing from new writers who have new ideas that we haven't thought of before. And please feel free to email or call, and I'm happy to discuss ideas with anybody. And I'll also give guidance about why an idea might not be a good idea, or I'll happily read your material and give you some honest feedback about it.
Thanks. Elan, Matt, and Tom, I have a question actually from one of our viewers, Jeremy King. Jeremy brings up a really good point. He wondered if you guys could speak to the do's and don'ts of first contacting a publication to pitch a story idea, what that's all about query letters, etc. Can you guys speak on that? And thank you, Jeremy, for the question.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that. Don't think you've got to do the layout. It's funny, sometimes people will send us a freelance article. It'll be in a PDF format with the pictures all in place, a headline and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, no, we have professionals who would do that. That fits our format. Thank you very much. So don't go to that trouble. And generally start out with a query letter as opposed to going ahead and writing an article and sending it in. And then for us to read it and go, well, this isn't for us, or if only you'd caught us in advance, we could have directed you this way rather than that way. So a query is really the best way. And email, at least for us, I think is typically the way we prefer to receive queries, is is via an email that just sort of outlines what your idea is and how it is that you might approach the story. And that can begin a dialogue then to help kind of flesh it out and create a story that is really useful to us.
I'll echo that. We, do get a lot of submissions that are fully written, often laid out with those photos. And, for whatever reason, they just aren't a good fit in that form, because of the length or the content or the angle or so forth. So, simple query letter is I think the best way to start. And it doesn't have to be anything too high concept or fancy from my perspective, just an introduction to yourself and your idea. Some writing samples are always useful. One problem that we have is that sometimes we'll find people will go out and tell people in advance that they're going to do a story for a vertical magazine. We have no idea who these people are. Of course, we've never, endorsed that. That is a big no-no. Don't do that. Don't tell your subject that you're going to be publishing a story in a certain publication if you don't have an assignment from the editors there.
Oh, that's a good
That's
one.
a great point,
Matt?
Elan. I would underline exactly what Tom and Elan said, but before you query a publication, you must read that publication and understand their audience, because you're trying to serve the particular reader for that publication. I can't tell you how many times I get queries or requests from public relations people to do stories about subjects that are, completely removed from what we cover. And those ones I just don't even respond to. I'm sorry, but I just don't have time. But they'll send me a query on, a new design for a vacuum cleaner. It's like, why are you even wasting your time with that? So please,
Talk about desperately wanting to get published.
exactly, learn the publication, see what they do, watch their videos. We do a lot of videos, and we have our own full-time videographer who does the editing. If you capture some video footage of something that might make an interesting story, that might be something we can put together working with you.
Elan, you were going to say something?
Oh, just remarking that a lot of those people who will send pitches, then again, send offended follow-up emails. Why haven't you?
Right. It's like, what?
So we have time for one more question we got from another viewer. Rick, I don't want to try to pronounce your last name. I'm afraid I might mess it up. It really, the bottom line on it has to do with urban air mobility. What are the three of you seeing in that space as that grows as part of the industry?
Well, I can start because we decided to launch a whole website, evtol.com, dedicated to it.
Exactly.
And I will say in the past week, that's kept me so busy. There's a huge amount of news coming out of the space. So I would say there's a lot of investment, a lot of enthusiasm. And, I think, as Matt would certainly agree, that has prompted a corresponding need for objective coverage of the industry. So, I think one place where aviation journalism can be really useful is kind of sorting through all of the legitimate news versus the hype in this space, because
Right.
there's a lot of hype, but there's also a lot of really cool technological progress that is going to shape aviation for decades to come. So we're excited about it, but skeptical at the same time.
Before the rest of you answer, let me ask you this though. I think one of the concerns with urban air mobility is safety. Are you guys seeing a lot about that and having to write about that?
Yeah, safety is a huge concern, especially for urban air mobility. My hunch is that the industry, like the eVTOL industry, is going to develop in other areas first before everyone's flying around in air taxis and crowded urban environments. It's difficult to say too much about safety at this point because a lot of the vehicles really aren't that far advanced. So we don't have a lot of good data on how reliable they are, what their modes of failure are. Certainly there's a lot of people trying to address these issues, both with the vehicle and the larger system. But that's going to have to be an ongoing conversation.
Tom, or go ahead, Michael.
Oh, sorry. That's a good point.
Or Matt. Yeah.
There's a lot of information out there about this new segment of the industry, we're addressing it with a new website called futureflight.aero, and we're
Yeah,
also,
congratulations on that. I think you guys just launched it, right?
that's right. Thank you, Vince. Yeah. And we're also skeptical and think that the industry or the readers need some objective information, especially those that are thinking of investing in these new products. But the safety aspect is important. I'm also kind of interested in the manufacturing side because they're talking about making thousands and thousands of these, and producing a small composite, complicated machine in high volume has not been something that's easily achievable at low cost. So that's going to be a really interesting aspect to watch.
Sure. Tom?
Yeah, I think the same thing. I think Elan said it right. It's, hype. There's a lot of it out there. It's up to us to kind of cut through the hype and do our best to bring forward really the meaningful projects. Last time I checked, there was something more than 250 eVTOL-like projects being developed, with many of them with huge amounts of money behind them, or several of them with lots of money and big companies behind them funding them. So there's definitely a lot of interest and curiosity about that. And I think they will get here. I think it's going to take longer than everybody thought. I think the first ones are going to be hybrid. They're not going to be pure electric, and the first ones are not going to be carrying passengers. I think everybody has come to the conclusion that they have to get the cargo sort of transportation with using these kind of vehicles down first, and demonstrate safety before the public is going to be willing to get into these kind of vehicles and have any confidence in them. If they can't deliver stuff effectively and efficiently and safely, then people are not going to get in them. So it's really critical that they get that part right in order for eVTOL, as we've kind of all envisioned it, or UAM, your urban air mobility, for that to be successful, it's got to have a lot of confidence on the public's part.
So it is going to open up writing opportunities.
Right.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Sure. We are almost out of time, but Michael, I wanted to give you, before we start to wrap things up, did you have a quick comment or question?
Quick question regarding some of the legislative stuff. Aviation is rich with FARs, federal aviation regulations. How do you cut through or communicate? For instance, like this eVTOL space, where the legislative stuff is some of the lead-in information that is coming out. How do you communicate that with readers at the moment at a level that they're able to understand?
Well, on the eVTOL side specifically, I mean, a lot of that regulation is still in the process of being determined. So that's a story in itself, the conversations about that space and how that's going to proceed. In general, I mean, regulations are tricky, and that's something that has come up in, some of those accident stories I've written as well. Like, how do you explain to the public the difference between certain types of operations, whether that's IFR, VFR, Part 91, Part 135. And I think that's something that you just have to, kind of dive into, pick out, what are the critical points that people need to know, and try to explain that as clearly and accurately as you can.
Okay.
Thank you. I always like to give our professional guests an opportunity to kind of close it out with a closing comment or advice to these aspiring young aviation professionals. So we'll start with you, Elan. Any advice as we wrap this up today?
I would just say, if you think that, you might be interested in pursuing this, give it a shot. You never know until you try. And don't think that you have to, have a degree in journalism to make it work. You don't. You just have to be passionate and knowledgeable, and we can help you with the rest.
Thank you. Matt?
I would say the same thing, give it a try and communicate with us, and to help make your writing richer and better, go fly.
There you go. Tom, that's a good segue to Tom. Tom?
Yeah, definitely go fly and practice the craft. I think Elan said it earlier about, writing is a skill that, you develop by doing it, just like, painting or any kind of other skill. In flying, you get better at it by doing it more. So do a lot of writing. But I just also want to take a moment to say congratulations to Dakota and Michael on really great starts to your careers. It's wonderful what you've achieved at such a young age and where you are already. And I look forward to following along over the coming many years as the two of you develop your skills, not only in aviation and flying, but hopefully you'll continue to have an interest in aviation journalism, and we'll hear great story ideas and video ideas from you that we'll be able to take advantage of.
Yeah, I like ditto on that. You guys have both had a really great start to your career, so congratulations to you also. And thank you all for being on the program today, being panelists and talking about an area of aviation that's not often talked about, even though a lot of us take it for granted because we count on the information that we get from it, both digitally and in hard copy. So thanks again, everybody, for being on All Things Aviation. On behalf of the Bob Hoover Legacy Foundation, I'm Vince Mickens. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Have a good one.
Thank you, Vince.